The chamber smelled like politics. Every chamber in the compact council smelled like it. Recycled air, something faintly floral that nobody had ordered, but somebody kept pumping through the vents anyway. And underneath all of it, the particular staleness of important people who had been talking too long. Ambassador Saren Voss had been in her seat for 4 hours. She had stopped moving 40 minutes ago. She sat with her hands flat on the table, her notes open in front of her, her face doing the thing it did when she let it do nothing at all. 19 years of diplomatic work had built that face. Smooth, unreadable. The kind of face that made younger delegates nervous, because they could never find the edge of it. Supreme Legate Oreth 9 was still talking. He had been talking for most of the session. 7 feet of iridescent kitten, moving across the chamber floor with the particular energy of something that had evolved on a world where keeping still meant getting eaten. His voice had a low, grinding quality that the translation system turned into clean, neutral standard, but something of the original texture always came through anyway. Like listening to a landslide give a speech. He was talking about the Kepler Corridor, again. The Kepler Corridor was a stretch of space at the edge of human-administered territory. Rich in minerals the Veth Dominion had been wanting for 2 decades. Close enough to human settlements that the question of rights to it had been moving through compact committees for 6 years. Saren had spent 3 of those 6 years writing the non-aggression framework, sitting on the table in front of Oreth 9 right now. He called it charming. He used that word twice in the first minute. Then he let the gallery absorb it. The gallery was full. It was always full when the Veth came to make a point. Their allies arranged themselves in the upper tiers, and their presence had a weight to it. The weight of numbers, of certainty, of people who had already decided how the session ended before it started. Oreth 9 picked up her framework document, held it the way you hold something when you want the room to see you holding it, without having actually read it. A document of charming philosophical ambition, he said. The gallery rippled, that gravel and tumbling sound. Amusement, Veth style. He set the document back down. Humans, he said, and paused, and let the words sit. Humans don't like war. Another pause. He was good with pauses, knew how to make a room wait. They have told us so, repeatedly, at length. He spread his 4-fingered hands wide, perfectly sure of themselves. In 17 different languages and 4 artistic mediums. The gallery went fully then. A real laugh, filling the chamber, rolling off the curved walls that were built to project sound exactly like this. We should perhaps, Oreth 9 said, take them at their word. Saren wrote one thing in her notes. There it is. She did not underline it. She had seen the shape of this coming for 6 months. Not from one big thing, from small things piling up. The Veth expanding their patrol routes along the corridor. The delays in committees that used to move fast. The way certain delegates had stopped making eye contact with her at receptions. The way Oreth 9 had started saying ambassador with a particular kind of weight behind it. The weight of someone who had stopped thinking of her as a person to negotiate with and started thinking of her as a process to complete. You didn't spend 19 years reading rooms without learning what one felt like right before something in it broke. She had filed 3 reports about it. She had been told the situation was being monitored. After the session ended, the framework tabled indefinitely, which was compact language for buried and forgotten. She requested a private meeting with Oreth 9. He agreed. As a courtesy. That was how he said it, a courtesy. They met in one of the small side rooms off the main chamber, just the 2 of them, and their translators. She said without warm-up, "You are misreading this." He looked at her the way a mountain looks at a weather report. "Ambassador Voss, your concern is noted and appreciated." "I'm not concerned," she said. "The way you carry something full without spilling it. Concerned is what you are about something that might go wrong. I'm telling you about something that will. She looked at him directly. You are looking at 300 years of a civilization choosing not to fight, and you are reading it as proof that they can't. Those are not the same thing. They are not even close to the same thing. He was quiet for a moment, a long one. Then he said, "You are of course free to believe that." She looked at him. He thanked her for her time. Her quarters on the station were small. Most diplomatic quarters were. There was a desk, a narrow bed, a window looking out on the stars, which sounded better than it was, because stars, when you lived among them, mostly just looked like a lot of cold and dark, with occasional punctuation. She sat at the desk and opened a comm channel. Earth was far from Veth Prime. Far enough that every call carried a lag, 6 minutes, give or take. You talked into the gap and waited for the other side of it to arrive. She waited for the connection, then said, "Hey, call me back when you get this. I just wanted to hear your voice." 6 minutes is not a long time when you are busy. It is a very long time when you are sitting alone in a room that smells like recycled air, listening to silence on the other side of a transmission, thinking about a man who used to sit in a kitchen in the middle of the night because he couldn't sleep and never once said why. Her grandfather had been 22 years old the first time he went to war. He came back, most of him. He kept 3 medals on the mantle in a house in Illinois, Purple Hearts. He never talked about where they came from. When certain music played, old music, the kind with horns, he went very still and looked at a point in the middle distance and stayed there until the song ended. Saren was 8 years old the first time she understood that the stillness was not peace. The comm clicked. Her daughter's voice. "Hey, I'm here. How did it go?" Saren looked at the window. "Fine," she said. "I need you to go stay with Aunt Mara for a while." Silence on the other end. Not the lag, the other kind. Then, "How long?" Saren opened her mouth, closed it. She looked at her notes, still open on the desk. "I'll call you tomorrow," she said. She closed the channel. Outside, the stars did what stars do, burned at distances too large to feel, patient in the way that things are patient when they have no choice about it. She sat with them for a long time. She thought about the mantle in Illinois, the 3 small medals, what they cost, what they bought, what they were in the end, to the people who handed them over, and to the people who came home carrying them. She had spent her entire career as the distance between the galaxy and what those medals meant. She could feel that distance closing. She left the light off. She sat in the dark, in the cold glow of distant suns, and let herself know the things she had been carefully not knowing for 6 months. They were going to make this happen, and when it did, the galaxy was finally going to understand what 300 years of choosing peace actually looked like from the other side. It would not look like what they expected, not even close. The people of Kepler 7c had a name for their settlement that didn't translate well into standard. It translated roughly as finally. 40,000 people, mostly families, farmers mostly, people who had traveled to the edge of human space because they wanted the specific kind of quiet that only comes from land you work yourself. Land where the sky is a color you have never seen before, and the dirt is dark and yours, and the days are long and ordinary, and exactly what you asked for. They had been there for 60 years. They were there for 60 years and 11 days, when the Veth Dominion's expansion fleet came through the corridor. The clearing of Kepler 7c took 4 hours. The emergency beacon from the settlement broadcast for 9 minutes before it went quiet. It was mostly technical data, coordinates, timestamps, structural readings. But at the very end, for about 12 seconds, it picked up a voice. A woman's voice. She was not talking to anyone in particular. She was just talking. The intelligence teams on Earth would listen to those 12 seconds many times in the weeks that followed. They never played it in any meeting. They never needed to. Commodore Jathvel was not a monster. He understood this about himself, the way that people understand things they need to keep understanding. He had a family on the Dominion homeworld, a mate, 2 offspring, a house at the edge of a city that got good light in the mornings. He composed music in his private hours, intricate, mathematical pieces in the Veth classical tradition, 6 movement structures that took years to properly finish. He believed in the Dominion's right to expand its territory because he genuinely, sincerely believed that expansion was order, and order was stability, and stability was the closest thing to mercy that the universe actually offered. He had ordered the clearing of Kepler 7c because his models said the humans would not fight for it. They never fought. That was the established fact. That was what 30 years of intelligence analysis, 17 independent assessments, and 6 centuries of observed human behavior all said, clearly and consistently. They would not fight. They would file a formal objection with the Compact Council. They would request emergency mediation. They would send diplomats. They always sent diplomats. He had the reparations package ready, generous by Dominion standards. He had written a personal note to accompany it, expressing regret for the disruption to the settlement and outlining a path to normalization. He was, in his own estimation, being reasonable. He waited for the diplomatic response. The cycle ended. Nothing came. He waited another cycle. The Compact Council received one message from the human delegation. 6 words. We are no longer attending this session. That was it. No ultimatum, no formal condemnation, no we will be compelled to respond unless, no list of demands, no request for emergency talks. 6 words, and then nothing. The galaxy read that silence as grief, as paralysis, as a small, peace-loving civilization sitting in shock, not knowing what to do next. Jathvel read it and felt something he could not name. It sat in his chest like a stone that was not quite the right shape for the space it was in. He pulled up the intelligence reports, read them again. He looked at 300 years of human diplomatic history, all the times they had been pushed and had responded by talking, by building frameworks, by proposing joint committees and cultural exchange programs and non-aggression documents with very neat formatting. He looked at the 6 words. He thought, this is not what grief sounds like. He did not know what it sounded like, but he thought. And he put this thought away quickly, the way you put something away that you are not ready to look at directly. He thought it sounded like a door closing very quietly from the inside. Saren Voss came home on a transport that smelled like fuel and too many people, and the particular kind of silence that settles over a ship when everyone on it is being careful not to say certain things out loud. Earth looked the way Earth always looked from approach, blue-white, old in a way that planets are old, which is a different kind of old than anything else. She had expected, somewhere in herself, to find panic when she landed. People in the streets, noise, the visible machinery of a civilization working out what to do next. What she found was quiet, not the quiet of people who didn't know, the quiet of people who did know and were still going to the market, still taking their children to school, still sitting in the parks in the afternoon light. Going about things with a particular kind of steadiness, the kind that isn't careless, the kind that is something else entirely. She had seen that steadiness before, once, on a man's face in a kitchen in Illinois, in the middle of the night. The meeting was in a basement in Geneva. The basement smelled like old coffee and concrete, and the specific kind of seriousness that has no appetite left, and no small talk, and no patience for anything that is not the actual point. 12 people around the table, defense ministers, strategic analysts, 3 people whose exact titles were not written anywhere, and one old man in a gray sweater at the far end, who had not spoken yet. His name was General Marcus Okafor. He was 67 years old. He had spent 40 years in the Human Defense Forces, and another 12 in a retirement he had been talked out of, twice. He had the kind of face that had stopped trying to look like anything in particular a long time ago, and just looked like what it was now. Experienced, in a way that very few things are, and completely unafraid of that. Saren set the Veth reparations package on the table. Nobody touched it. The room looked at it. Then the room looked at Okafor. He looked at the package for a long time. Then he said quietly, like a man who had said a thing before and had been hoping not to say it again, "All right." 2 words. The room changed. Not loudly, not with any visible drama. It changed the way a thing changes when the last thing holding it in one position is removed. A settling, a shift in weight. Saren felt it happen. She had been in hundreds of rooms where decisions were made, and she had never felt one change like this before. Like something very old had just opened its eyes. Joth Vel received the intelligence report on a Tuesday. His senior analyst had flagged it with the yellow marker, which meant unusual but not urgent. He read it at his desk with a cup of cooling liquid that he kept forgetting to drink. Human shipyards had reclassified. All of them, simultaneously. Cargo facilities, manufacturing platforms, civilian construction yards, all reclassified. The report estimated 14 cycles to full operational conversion. Purpose of reclassification? Unknown. He read that line twice. He looked at the timeline. 14 cycles. He set the report down and sat very still in his chair for a while. Outside his viewport, the stars moved slowly with the rotation of the station. The same stars he had been looking at for 30 years, doing what they always did, patient and enormous, and completely indifferent to the small, terrible things happening in the spaces between them. He thought, I should send them a message. He thought, I could still fix this. He thought about the 6 words. We are no longer attending this session. The stone in his chest shifted. Resettled. He did not send the message. He picked up the report again. He read the timeline one more time. 14 cycles. He wondered, for the first time, what was going to come out of those yards when the 14 cycles were done. He had assumptions. He had models and projections, and the full weight of 30 years of strategic analysis behind him. He was going to find out how much that was worth. He suspected, in a way he could not quite justify to himself yet, that the answer was going to be instructive. The archives sat outside Geneva, on a hill that got good wind in the mornings. From the outside it looked like a library, which is mostly what it was. Long stone building, old trees, the kind of place that made you walk more slowly just by existing. There were school trips here on weekdays, children moving through the display halls, reading the plaques, looking at the artifacts behind glass, with the particular expression children wear when they are being shown something that adults consider very important. Saren had been here twice in her life before this. She followed General Okafor through the main hall, past the displays. He moved through the building the way a man moves through his own house in the dark, without hesitating, without checking, his feet finding the path before his eyes needed to. He knew where everything was. She was starting to understand why. The hall they ended up in was not on the public tour route. It was behind a door that required 2 separate clearances and a palm scan, and was, as far as most records were concerned, a maintenance corridor. It was not a maintenance corridor. It was a room full of blueprints, not digital files, actual physical blueprints, preserved behind protective glass, laid flat or rolled into labeled tubes on metal shelving that ran from floor to ceiling. Hundreds of them. The lighting was climate-controlled and low, the kind of amber light that archivists use when they want things to last. She stood in the middle of it and looked around. Okafor stopped, in front of one particular case. "We never deleted any of it," he said. His voice was completely normal. The same voice he had used to say, "All right," in the basement, like he was discussing the weather. "Any of what?" she asked, even though she already knew. "Any of it." He looked at the blueprint in the case. Every design, every specification. Every tactical manual, every weapons platform schematic, every construction protocol going back 600 years. He paused. "We put it in here. We built a museum around it. We brought school children to look at it and told them what it cost." He paused again. "We just never threw it away." Saren looked at the blueprint. She could read enough of it to know what it described, what it was designed to do, what it was very, very good at. She thought about all the things she had said in chambers and council rooms and private meetings for 19 years. All the frameworks, all the careful language, all the patient, deliberate work of choosing words that built something instead of breaking it. She thought about 40,000 people on a planet called Finally. "How long?" she asked. He didn't ask her to clarify. "We're already building," he said. She understood, standing in that room, that she had been wrong about one thing. Not about the war. She had been right about the war, right that it was coming, right about what it would cost, right that the people who started it had no idea what they were starting. She had been wrong about her grandfather. She had always thought the thing he carried, the silence, the stillness, the 3 medals on the mantle, was damage, a wound that hadn't healed, the cost of going to war and surviving it. But standing in a room full of blueprints that 6 generations of humans had carefully preserved and never used, she understood something different. The wound wasn't from the fighting. The wound was from knowing you could. From knowing with complete certainty exactly what you were capable of, and choosing every single day to be something else instead. From carrying that knowledge in your chest for the rest of your life, from sitting in kitchens in the middle of the night with it, and getting up in the morning and choosing, again, to be something other than what the worst days had shown you. That was what he had been carrying. Not the war, the weight of not going back to it. She stood in the room with Okafor for a long time and did not say any of this. Then she said, "Show me the production timeline." Jathvel's intelligence reports arrived every morning. For the first 2 weeks after the reclassification, they were short. Not much to report. The human shipyards had gone quiet. Not inactive, but sealed. Production continuing inside, but nothing coming out yet. His analysts described it as a retooling period and told him to expect the first outputs in approximately 12 cycles. Then the reports started getting longer. Week 3, construction scaffolding visible on 7 major platforms. Scale inconsistent with civilian shipping. Week 5, energy consumption across human industrial systems had increased by a factor that his analysts flagged in red, and then, apparently, checked 3 times before putting in the report because they were not confident in the number. Week 7, the first ship came out of the yards. He looked at the image for a long time. He knew a warship when he saw one. He had been around warships his entire career. He knew their shapes, their proportions, the particular geometry of something built not for cargo or passengers, but for one specific purpose. But there was something about this one that was different from any ship he had seen before, and he spent an hour trying to work out what it was, before one of his younger analysts said, very carefully, "Sir, I think it's the age of the design." He looked at her. "The design is old," she said. "Our historical database has partial records of this class. It was last built approximately 200 years ago. But the construction quality," she hesitated. "The construction quality is very high. Better than the original. They built it better than they built it the first time." He looked at the image again. He pulled up the cultural archive files. He had been reading them obsessively for weeks. He read about a species that had spent 6 centuries cataloging every war it had ever fought. not hiding the records, not glorifying them either, just keeping them, precisely, thoroughly, every design, every tactic, every mistake, and every success. He read about a day they observed on every human world, one day, every year, where they counted the dead, all of them, every war, every century, going back to the beginning. They knew the exact number. He put the file down. He looked at the image of the ship. Oh, he thought. Oh, that is not a species that forgot how to do this. That is a species that remembered so carefully that they never needed to practice. The reservists came in without being asked twice. That was the thing that stayed with Saren later, when she thought about those weeks. She had expected resistance, the very reasonable response of people who had built entire lives on the belief that they would never be called for this. Instead, they came in without being asked twice. Some of them were old, 50, 60, 65 years old, coming in with the particular unhurried way of people who have already decided something and are simply now doing it. They did not seem excited. They did not seem afraid. They seemed, in a way she found very hard to look at directly, like people who had been waiting. Not eagerly, not with any want in it, just ready. The way her grandfather had always been ready. The stillness of someone who knew exactly what they were and had the discipline not to be it. And then, when the choice was taken from them, the capability to be it fully. The young Veth diplomat came 12 days before the fleet launched. She was young, probably her first major posting, doing her job with a focused, frightened professionalism that Saren found herself respecting more than she had expected to. She requested an emergency meeting. Saren took it the same day. The young diplomat said the Dominion wished to discuss reparations. She had a new package, larger than the first one. She slid it across the table with both hands, the Veth gesture for sincerity. Saren looked at it. She looked at it for a long time. Then she said, "I know." Pause. "You're about 4 weeks too late." The diplomat looked at the table, then back up. "Ambassador Voss," her voice was careful, very steady for how young she was. "Is there nothing?" "There was nothing," Saren said. 6 months ago, there was something. I sat in a room with Oreth 9 and told him very clearly what would happen. He thanked me for my charming concern. She kept her voice level. Not unkind, exactly, but not soft. "There's a process now. Let it finish. Then come back and we'll talk about what comes after." She stood. The diplomat stayed seated for a moment. Then she picked up the reparations package and walked out. The First Fleet left dock on a Tuesday. No ceremony, no speeches from the steps of any building. No crowds gathered at observation points to watch it go. They just went. Saren watched from the station's observation bay. 43 ships, moving out of orbit, in a formation that looked almost leisurely from this distance. The way large things always look leisurely when you are watching from far away. She stood at the window with her hands at her sides, and felt the specific quiet she had spent her entire career trying to make sure she would never understand from the inside. She understood it now. Every bit of it. She hated being right. She had always hated being right about the things that cost the most. The first thing Jathvel noticed was where they came from. Not the direction he expected, not the approach vector his models had spent 3 weeks calculating, not the entry point his defensive formations had been arranged to cover, not the path that every reasonable projection said they would take. They came from somewhere else entirely. His tactical system flagged the anomaly 4 minutes before the human fleet dropped out of transit, which was not enough time to do anything except understand what was happening. He stood on the command bridge of the Dominion's Reach and watched the readouts update, and felt, in a cold and very final way, that the 4 minutes were not an accident. They had known exactly where his ships were going to be. The human fleet materialized in perfect formation. 43 ships. He had expected the number. He had not expected the geometry of how they arranged themselves. A spread that made no sense according to standard Veth engagement doctrine. Too wide, too loose. None of the tight aggressive clustering that his training said an attacking force should use. His senior tactician said, "What are they doing?" No one answered, because no one knew. His tactical AI began analyzing the formation, began constructing a response model, generated 3 options in the first 40 seconds, which was fast. Fast enough that he started to feel for just a moment that his systems had this, that the models would hold. Then the AI stopped mid-analysis. Error flag. He had never seen that before, not in 30 years. The system could not classify the formation, not because the data was insufficient, because the pattern it was trying to match was not in its database. It was not in its database because it was 200 years old. He found the name for it later. He found it in the archive files he had been reading obsessively for weeks. A very old term from a period of human history that his analysts had classified as ancient and therefore irrelevant. Envelopment. Force on 3 sides simultaneously. Make the enemy choose between 2 disasters while you prepare the third. Do not fight the enemy where they are strongest. Make them move. Make them respond. And while they are responding, close the last door. He understood it, reading the name later, in full. At the time, on the bridge, with the readouts updating, and his tactician asking a question that had no answer. He understood it in a different way. In the way your body understands something before your mind catches up. In the way your hands reach for something because they already know what they are reaching for. He said, "Break formation, fall back to secondary coordinates." His tactician looked at him. "Sir, the secondary coordinates put us in—" "I know where they put us." He looked at the display. "Do it now." They did it. It was not fast enough. Saren did not watch the battle feeds in real time. She had tried on the first day, in the command center in Geneva, where the feeds came in live from the relay stations. Then she had stood up, walked out quietly so as not to disturb anyone, and gone to the room next door. The room next door was smaller. No displays, a long table, a data terminal, a window that looked out on the hill with the trees. She sat down and opened the casualty reports. Both sides. She read every one. She did not skip the Veth numbers. She did not look away from the human numbers. She read them with the careful, grinding attention of someone who has decided that if she is going to be responsible for a thing being in the world, she is going to know exactly what that thing is. Okafor came in once, stood next to her without speaking for a while. Then he said, "We're winning." She said, "I know." He said, "Saren, I know, Marcus." She did not look up from the reports. "I know." He left her alone. She kept reading. What the Veth had expected. A military force built quickly under pressure, emotional, overextended, fighting the way a civilian fights, with anger and desperation, hard to coordinate, easy to outmaneuver once the initial force was absorbed. What they found, something that had no interest in being absorbed. The human commanders did not fight beautifully. The Veth tradition of warfare had aesthetics to it, formations that looked deliberate, maneuvers that had names and histories, a culture of engagement that rewarded elegance. Veth military academies produced officers who understood warfare as a discipline with style. The human commanders did not fight with style. They fought with an efficiency so complete it had its own kind of brutality. Every movement had a purpose. Every position was chosen to create 2 problems for the enemy at once. They did not take ground they did not intend to keep. They did not press advantages that would cost more than they were worth. They did not make the same mistake twice. Jathvel watched it happening across the engagement zones, and felt, with a clarity that was almost peaceful, that he had made a very serious error. Not a tactical error, a foundational one. He had looked at 300 years of human peace, and seen a civilization that had grown soft, grown comfortable, grown away from the hard realities that shaped every other species in the galaxy. He understood now what he had actually been looking at. A civilization that had taken everything it knew about war, every lesson, every mistake, every hard-bought piece of tactical knowledge from 6 centuries of fighting itself, and had decided to stop using it. Had chosen, deliberately and consciously, and with full knowledge of what it was choosing, to put all of that in a room and close the door, and had maintained that choice for 300 years. Not because it forgot, because it remembered. The human fleet moved through his defensive positions the way water moves through something with cracks in it. Not forcing, not smashing. Finding the cracks and being water. By the 3rd day, he had lost contact with 2 of his forward stations. By the 5th day, his supply lines were cut in 1 sector and under pressure in 2 more. By the 8th day, he filed an emergency report to the Dominion High Command that said, in the flat, precise language of military documentation, that the engagement was not proceeding according to projected parameters. He did not write what he actually knew, which was that the projected parameters had been wrong from the beginning, and that the person who had told him so was a human diplomat in a side room at the Compact Council, and that he had thanked her for her charming concern. He thought about that conversation often in those 8 days. He thought about it with the specific and thorough regret of someone who had been told the exact shape of a disaster and had not believed it. The Kepler corridor was clear in 11 days. Looked at the final report, the engagement summary, the numbers at the bottom. She added the last figure to her count. She sat with it for a moment. Then she stood up, straightened her jacket, and walked into the room where the next set of decisions needed to be made. The war was over. What came after a war was not nothing. It was never nothing. It was in some ways harder than the war itself, because wars had a direction and an end, and what came after was just life, going on with a new shape to everything, the shape that events leave behind when they are finally done with you. She had work to do. She had always had work to do. The galaxy had been preparing for 2 outcomes. In the first, humanity limped home, too damaged, too stretched, their quick mobilization spent, and their capacity exhausted. The Veth Dominion, humbled but intact, would negotiate from a position of remaining strength. The Compact Council would mediate. Things would return, more or less, to where they had been, with new lines drawn and everyone a little older and more careful. In the second, humanity did not stop. This was the outcome that kept diplomats awake across the Compact. A civilization that had not projected force in 3 centuries, finally driven to it, discovering what it was capable of, and continuing, expanding, taking, becoming the thing its long peace had supposedly prevented it from becoming. An empire, in the end, like every other empire, just newer, just fresher. Every historical model, every pattern matching across known civilizations, every assessment of how species behave when they discover they are stronger than they believed, all of it pointed the same direction. The human fleet stopped exactly where it started. Kepler 7c returned to human jurisdiction. The Veth expansion stations along the corridor were dismantled or transferred. Reparations, calculated to a number that Saren's team had spent 3 weeks arriving at, not generous, not punitive, exactly what the math said, were agreed to. The human fleet came home. All of it. The galaxy watched this happen and did not know what to do with it. The Compact Council session reconvened 6 weeks after cessation of hostilities. The chamber was very full. Orath 9 was not there. The Dominion government had removed him from his position with impressive speed, in the particular way that governments remove people who have become expensive to be associated with. His replacement was the young diplomat who had come to Saren's meeting 4 weeks before the fleet launched. She sat in Orath 9's seat now, composed and careful, and wearing the expression of someone determined to make the best of a situation they had inherited. Saren sat across from her. The Dara Collective Ambassador, one of the oldest working diplomats in the Compact, 60 years at this table, having watched civilizations rise and reposition and fold and rebuild, leaned toward Saren during the first recess and said, in the manner of someone asking a genuine question they had been holding for several weeks, "I have been in this work for a long time. I have seen many outcomes after many conflicts. I have never seen a victor ask for less than what they were owed." Saren looked at her. "We asked for exactly what we were owed," she said. "That," the Dara ambassador said carefully, "is precisely what I mean." Saren was quiet for a moment. She looked at the chamber, at the full galleries, at the 17 civilizations that had watched what happened and were now here to understand what it meant. "We know where it goes," she said. "If we take more than we lost, the next generation has a reason. And we are very tired of the next generation having reasons." The Dara ambassador looked at her for a long time. They went back to their seats. Jathvel was not in prison. The new Dominion government had, under pressure from the Compact, and with the particular efficiency of a body trying to close a very bad chapter quickly, granted amnesty to the senior military command in exchange for full cooperation with the transition. He was retired. His security clearance was revoked. He was given a residence on a mid-tier Dominion world and the understanding that he would be accessible for any formal inquiry that might be required. He went home. His family was there. Smaller than he remembered, or maybe he had grown larger in ways he had not noticed, had taken up more internal space, so that everything outside seemed more compact. His mate said nothing about the war for 3 days, and then, on the 4th evening, asked if he was all right. He said yes. He thought about whether it was true for a while after that. He sat in his workroom and opened the music file. The composition had 6 movements. 5 were complete. He had started the 6th years ago and never been able to find how it should resolve. The movement kept circling the same melodic problem. A tension built carefully over 4 minutes that wanted to land somewhere and could not. He worked on it. He had always worked on it when he needed to think about something he could not think about directly. He read the human archive files again. He read about a species that had looked at what it was, genuinely looked, without flinching, counted every death, catalogued every failure, built museums to the worst things it had done, and then decided to try to be something else. Had tried for 300 years. Had been pushed back to what it was anyway, by someone who thought its trying was weakness. He thought, they knew exactly what they were. He thought, they knew it the whole time. He thought, and they were trying anyway. He looked at the unfinished movement on his screen, the melodic problem, the tension that wouldn't land. He tried something, a minor resolution, quiet, not triumphant, not quite sad either. Something that settled rather than soared, that ended by accepting the weight of what it carried rather than putting it down. He played it through. It was right. He sat with that for a moment. Then he saved the file and went to find his family. The medals arrived in a small box from Saren's mother. She had asked for them without fully knowing why. She'd been back in Geneva for 2 weeks by then, working through the post-war framework, the formal agreements, the new corridor protocols, the quiet diplomatic work of making sure that what had happened had edges, had a shape, would not just bleed indefinitely into everything that came after. She set the box on the table in her apartment and didn't open it for 2 days. When she finally opened it, the 3 purple hearts were exactly as she remembered them. Small, heavier than they looked. The kind of heavy that doesn't come from the metal. She put them on the table and sat across from them. Outside, Geneva was just Geneva. Tuesday afternoon, Late light on Old Stone. People moving through the city with the ordinary urgency of people who had things to do, places to be, lives proceeding along their usual lines, with the usual mix of difficulty and small pleasure and forward motion that constitutes most of living, most of the time. They had done it before. 300 years without a war. Not because they had forgotten what they were, not because they had grown too comfortable to fight, too soft to remember, but because they had looked at what they were and said clearly and with full knowledge of the cost of the saying, "Not this time. Not again. We know exactly where this goes, and we are not going there." And they had held that choice for 300 years, and they could hold it again. That was the thing that the intelligence reports had missed, and the cultural analysts had missed, and Orath 9 had missed so completely that the missing of it had cost him everything. They had all looked at a peaceful civilization and seen an absence. The absence of aggression, the absence of military culture, the absence of the will to fight. They had not seen what was actually there. The choice. The daily, conscious, expensive, ongoing choice of a species that knew exactly what it was capable of, and had decided, for 300 years, to be something else instead. Saren picked up the medals, set them back down. She thought about her grandfather in his kitchen, the stillness, the middle-of-the-night silence. She understood it now, all of it. He had been carrying the knowledge the whole time. The full, undiminished knowledge of what he was, what the war had shown him about himself, what it had confirmed. And every morning he had gotten up and gotten dressed, and been a man who grew vegetables in summer, and argued with the neighbors about nothing important, and fell asleep in his chair, watching old films in the evening. He had chosen that. Every day. That was the wait. Not the war. The choice that came after. Saren looked at the medals for a long time. Then she looked out the window at the city. At all the people moving through it, carrying their own weights, making their own choices, going on. She thought, we were doing it. She thought we were actually, genuinely doing it. She thought, we will do it again. She would fight for every single year of it. She always had. She put the medals in her jacket pocket, close where she could feel the weight of them, and went back to work.